Calling the Wednesday, May 5th, 2021 City of Norco Norco City Council meeting to order. We will begin with a roll call, please.
Councilmember Hoffman? Here. Councilmember Grummeyer?
Here.
Councilmember Alleman?
Yes. Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Newton? Here. Mayor Bash?
Yes.
All present.
We'll now begin with the Pledge of Allegiance from Councilmember Grummeyer.
Gentlemen, please join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My good friend Renee, please remain standing.
Good morning. Bow with me for a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for, God, the opportunity to gather in freedom tonight. Thank you, God, that we live in this great nation of the United States. Lord, as we are moved, God, in the privileges and that you have granted graciously and that has been long fought for through many generations, Lord. May you grant wisdom and direction, Lord, to all of those, Father God, all of our city council members, Father, Lord, those that are serving God, our city. Lord, and we thank you, Father, for this opportunity. Lord, even as you told us, if we lack wisdom, that we can ask of you, and you give generously, Lord, to all who ask it without preference, Father. Lord, that you would grant it. I pray for wisdom tonight, wisdom in the direction of our community, Father, our city, Lord, and that you would continue to grace us with your presence, Lord God, with opportunities for our community to prosper and to do good to those around us, Father. And Lord, we thank you, God, for this evening. In your name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Renee. So I want to wish you all a happy Cinco de Mayo. Hope you had a great day. We're going to move to an introduction. Andy, if you would like to introduce our new Human Resources Manager.
Sure. Cindy, could you step to the podium? Thank you, Mr. Mayor and honorable council members. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this evening formally our new Human Resources Manager, Cynthia Balderas. She goes by Cindy, so you can call her Cindy. Cindy has over 22 years of human resources experience, all with the city of Rialto prior to joining our team here at the city of Norco. She started her career at the city of Rialto in 1998 as human resources assistant and worked her way all the way to human resources manager in 2012 when she was promoted to that position. In that capacity, she managed the day-to-day operations of the Human Resources and Risk Management Department. She led a team of technical and professional staff to create an atmosphere of trust, transparency, and fairness. Some of her duties consisted of labor negotiations, advising department heads and other managers on issues related to human resources, such as recruitment, selection, and job analysis. Cindy has a bachelor's degree in business management from the University of Phoenix. She regularly participates in training dealing with development in human resources and new laws and regulations. Cindy has been married to her husband for 20 years. Together they have an 11-year-old named David, who is currently finishing 5th grade. Cindy has also told me that she enjoys baking and spending time with families and friends. So we are going to be waiting for a lot of cakes here. Please join me in welcoming Cindy to her new position with the city of Norco.
Would you like to say a couple of words?
Well, I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity and the employees.
my way, I am ready.
Well, welcome to the Norco family. You actually, it's hard to believe you started in 1998. You look very young.
Oh, thank you. Thank
You're
you very
welcome.
much. Yes, I started when I was 12.
That's what I was. That's what I thought. Well, welcome.
Thank you
and
very
I look
much.
forward to working with you and seeing you around.
As do I. Thank you.
Great. Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
One of the things we came up with as a council is it's been a very difficult year, and so we decided as a council that we would, each council meeting, we would recognize a group or person or persons who during the pandemic exemplified volunteer spirit in Norco. And so each of us on a rotating basis pick somebody that we feel, or some organization that we feel should be recognized. So tonight it's Councilman Hoffman's turn in the wheel.
Get this on, Kevin.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. For my selection for the Norco Spirit Award was the Norco Rotary. The Norco Rotary was founded in 1968. Over the years, has been an integral part of the city of Norco. Many local businesses and civic leaders, as well as elected officials, have been or are members of this international organization. Their motto is service above self. Many clubs, organizations have benefited from their service and generosity over the years. So what happens? The pandemic, and it threw a whole new deal on us. One of our members, Ed Snyder, he was going through rehab, and he ended up at that Riverside hospital that was hit heavily with COVID. So we lost Ed, not him living, but we just lost track of him. They were moving him all over the county, and finally ended up from Indio to Menifee. He's back with us now. He's rehabbing. He's doing quite well. And then another member, Violet, she has family in Barbados, and guess what? She was stuck in Barbados, and she couldn't come back. So the COVID pandemic has really hurt us, but we didn't let it stop us. And for my gentleman over here and my fellow Rotary members, come on up here. You can stand up back here, and I want to do so. This is, we have 15 members, and I'm going to do these four gentlemen here, Joe, Scott, Shane, Bill, and you see him, and Doug, come on in here, Doug, you can't sneak over there. You can see these people around. These are local businessmen. They've been around in town for a long period of time, belong to other organizations. But let me tell you what we did over this past pandemic year. Every year, the Norco Rotary Club has funded local middle school and high school students who attend 2 or 3 day leadership camps. Last year, due to the pandemic, the camps were canceled. The Norco Rotary redirected the funds to help local people in need and began donating to the Norco High School FFA food bank program. We had the funds, but we had no place to put the money. So we directed it over there to help Miss Robbins' program. The Norco Rotary was able to secure grant funding to donate $500 per month from July 2020 to June 2021 to the Norco High School FFA Food Bank. This amounts to over $7,000 in donation to the Norco High School Food Bank program. They did this through the purchasing through Stater Brothers Market script from the Norco Horsemen Associations, which receives a percentage of the funds. So the Norco Horsemen Association was able to take their funds and provide those to the Norco seniors and pets in relief program. So for that, it was a win-win for us. Besides the food bank, the Norco Rotary also secured grant funding for holiday meals for the Norco Senior Center. The Norco Rotary was able to provide 100 hot meals to the seniors for both the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. We couldn't have our annual get-together, the music and song, but the seniors came through in their drive-through, and we handed them a meal, and we got these Rotarians along with some of their kids and grandkids, and we put them to work, handing them out. For many years, the Norco Rotary Club has selected students from local high schools to participate in the Rotary District Music Competition. This year, the competitions were canceled. And in order to keep our local students active in music participation, the Norco Rotary reached out to the Rotary District leadership and was able to secure $2,500 in funding to purchase microphones for the Norco High School choir under Miss Randine. The microphones provided the students the ability to continue their singing and participation in a virtual choir program. Part of the grant required the participation of youth groups to interact with diversity people, and that included our disabled students. And what we did is we picked up and hooked up with the Victor Spowers. And Matt, if you've got that queued up, I want to show you the short video.
There's only one way to reach across the border. There's only one hope that will loosen heavy chains. If we have love, we can free the broken-hearted. It's time to look toward the future and say, in a world that's full of pain, we can turn the dark to light. No matter where we stand, we need to reach out our hand.
Singing for the Victor Spowers students impacted me because it made me happy that I could make them happy by singing a song, and it was pretty cool.
No matter where we live, we all have something to give. Wanna build love.
It's crazy how much music connects everyone in all sorts of ways.
Loneliness and poverty, oh shame and fear, deeper than the pain.
In a way that makes me feel more open.
Love is the answer. Faith to believe there's a better way. Hope gives us the courage. Stand up and make a change. Stand up and make a change. So got to make a change. Gotta make a change.
The microphones helped Miss Randine's madrigals and choirs be able to sing from their homes and put this kind of program on and share that with the students who are also inbound or homebound at the Victor Spowers program. So it was a good interaction for them. And I think we agreed as this would be a good case for diversity training for our young students. And that's what we did with it. And our local grant out of our district Rotary helped us fund that to us. So that was about $2,500 in mics and then some monies for T-shirts and things like that. So we're proud that we could do that during this pandemic time. Also, the Norco Rotary participated at the local high schools, include providing monetary scholarships to graduating seniors. The pandemic did not stop the Norco Rotary from giving these scholarships out. We've given them out in 2020, and we're giving them out again this year in 2021. At the beginning of the pandemic shutdown, the Norco Rotary had already planned for the beginning of the new Eastvale Rotary Club. As for years, the Norco Rotary Club had been fostering a group for a time. And on July 1st, 2020, the Greater Eastvale Rotary Club was formed, with the Norco Rotary donating $2,000 to help them get started. In Rotary, we have a saying, Kiwanans, they lift and they break their backs. We just open our wallets.
Hey.
I have to give him more time. As part of their continued support for Norco, the Norco Rotary annually donates $1,000 to the upkeep of the Veterans Memorial, and they do that and hold their Pitchfork Steak Fondue. Due to the pandemic, this Memorial Day event had to be canceled, but we have come up with something else, and we've teamed up with the grocery outlets, and we will be having a breakfast at Nellie Weaver Hall before the ceremony on Memorial Day. During the pandemic, the Norco Rotary International promoted the continuation of their polio vaccination program to many third world nations still suffering from polio. As part of that effort, the Norco Rotary was able to send $3,000 of its own foundation funds to the polio program. That amount was matched by the district, and that amount was tripled by the Bill Gates Foundation for a total of almost $20,000 in donation for the worldwide polio vaccination program through Rotary International. And finally, the Norco Rotary will have open their wallets out again to help local businesses. For most of you don't know, we meet every Thursday at 7:30, and we meet over at the Cowgirl Cafe. Well, like everybody else in the pandemic, they were hit hard. And so we have, our members there individually have opened their wallets up and donated to Karen and Gary. Joe, we have a little deal that I was not gambling, but it's a little thing we play. Joe donated, what, $400 to him on that? Yeah, $400 to them, to Gary and Karen, and to Anna during this time. So we're happy to do that. We only have 15 members, and we have service above self as our motto. Look forward. We're going to continue doing our breakfast on Memorial Day morning, and then we'll have a car show in September because we want to get out and meet the people. So, guys, Jane is we got our treasurer, our secretary, Doug, and Scott, past president. Matter of fact, everybody here has been a past president of Rotary at one time or another. So, Bill, I'm going to give it to the money man. All right. So thank you guys very much.
That's real gold?
It's Norco. Tools. But thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. You're going to take a picture, Joe. We'll get a picture.
Picture? He's got a camera.
Yeah, get in front of the podium.
Yeah, we'll get here.
Who has a camera? Oh, there you go, Brian.
On up over here. Take your mask off, Joe.
Thank you, Renee. Moving on to City Council communications, reports on regional boards and commissions. We'll begin with Mayor Pro Tem. Been in meetings all day today. I'm sorry, guys. Mayor Pro Tem Newton.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make it real easy. I have no regional report to give.
Okay. Catherine?
Yes. On April 22nd, I attended the Western Riverside County Regional Wastewater Authority Board meeting where I preside as vice chair. As part of that, we approved the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 operating and capital improvement budget, which is on the consent calendar for tonight. A couple of things, there were a number of capital improvement projects on there, including an odor mitigation project, which is going to be part of the permit that's required by South Coast AQMD, and an emergency pump, anaerobic digester, some other items that are important to keep the facility up and going.
Great, thank you. Robin?
I actually attended a meeting today, so I'm just going to report real quick. The Homeless Solutions Committee for Riverside County District 2 had a meeting today. We're looking at doing a lot of work as a regional collaboration in the Santa Ana Riverbed. So there's 4 goals to this group of organizations that are meeting. Goal number 1 is to rehouse residents of the Santa Ana Riverbed encampments. Goal 2 is to remove and mitigate physical encampments in the Santa Ana Riverbed. Goal 3 is to conduct cleanup and habitat restoration. And goal 4 is to establish effective tools to prevent the recurrence of encampments. It's a pretty lofty task, a very lofty task, but Riverside County Parks, the supervisor's office, all the cities that have a buy-in to the Santa Ana Riverbed all send representatives to this meeting. What I found particularly effective is we're actually being put into work groups and being assigned tasks. So the work groups for getting this done, there's going to be a public safety work group. The second group is going to be homeless encampment response team. The third group will be facilities and habitat restoration groups. So we were able to look at those groups today. We all agreed upon the goals, and so I'm looking forward to continued work with this huge regional collaboration. I really think it's going to be a model for other jurisdictions across the state to follow. We're definitely on the front edge of being proactive about this particular issue. And again, just reminding residents that it's going to take time and money and other resources to get this done, but you have a group of organizations that are committed to doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
I've been busy, but I'm going to touch on two that are very important for us in Riverside County. The first is the Interstate 15 Smart Freeway Pilot Project out of the Riverside County Transportation Commission. What is going to happen is, most of you know that travel the Interstate 15, we all had metered intersections, but I didn't know this, I don't know if you do, that those intersections aren't synchronized. They just work for each intersection and on and off ramp. So that's the only traffic each one monitors. Under this Smart Freeway project, which started in Australia, they synchronize all of the lights in an area. So this is going to start in Temecula, where off Winchester Road. That's where the pilot starts down there. It's really it's a mess down there. It's worse than up here on ours. But what they're hoping to do is get this started, and in at least on our area in our county, to start working and developing on each of the intersections on their freeway, so we don't have the mess as you go up to Cajalco up there off that road, as you go up by Magnolia, that bottleneck they have up there. So all these will be synchronized. This will be the second application of this program. The first application is in Denver, Colorado. They're starting it there, and this will be the second application of this program. So we're looking forward to it. We've got to do something better than what we've been doing, and as you well know, if you travel the Interstate 15, if we can get done there, then it's going to go to the other areas of the county and hopefully the state. But it's a commitment by the Riverside County Transportation Commission, along with Caltrans, everything to a tune of $16 million. So hopefully we can get it done. And then the other thing, and I want to appreciate Mayor Bash and Brian Petrie. We went over and visited the Riverside County Santa Ana River Trails Commission and had a serious discussion about the Santa Ana River Trails and the changes that have come up there. For most of us that ride the trails or have ridden the trails, we know how important that river trail is to complete that section. So I thought we had a real good meeting. And it's like Robin said, everybody has to get on the same page on this, so we can get this part of it done. Norco is the last section that needs to get done. I think the good thing that came out of there, the county parks wants to get it done. We all want to get it done. We just want to make sure what is done we can use. So with that, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Celebrating Military History Month.
Oh yeah, that was mine. This is May, month of May. Celebration of Military Appreciation Month. There's a whole lot of other things going, but as I said, we start out with this month, everybody, the families, later on this part of this month, Law Enforcement Appreciation Month, and then as we get towards the end, we finish it up with Memorial Day. And as we have said, we are going to have an in-person Memorial Day ceremony. Thank you.
So anyway, I was pretty busy this last couple of weeks as things begin to open up. WRCOG, the meeting that Ted talked about. Saturday, very interesting. We actually have a location scout that works for the city of Norco to bring filming into Norco and, gas stations, things like that. And she actually had a really cool seminar with a lot of students who are looking to get into that end of the business, so that was a lot of fun. All 5 of us attended the Leaps and Bounds Saddle Up fundraiser, and how much money did they raise? I had to leave early. Over $180,000. Wow. Next one. Western Riverside County Regional Conservation. I'm going to show a couple of videos here. People may not know what we're doing. What this is if you build in one section of Riverside County, you can actually buy credits in another part of Riverside County, and we protect habitat, birds, and they're actually creating like a trailway so that foxes and cougars and all kinds of things and bobcats have a way to get underneath freeways and things like that. And so what we're doing is we're truly conserving huge areas of wild open space for some recreation, but primarily to preserve endangered species. So I have 3 little short videos that you could actually see online, but I thought I'd show them. But this is so much fun to do. There you go. So I mean, I don't know why I get excited about granite night lizards. These are on the website. We see one of these every time we have a meeting. We get new insight. And the last one. She likes that one. And this is a very interesting project. I've had the good fortune to be able to hike most of this, and it's really fantastic, and especially at night. I've actually walked underneath the freeway, and you cannot believe the critters that are out there at night. It's pretty cool. Veterans Memorial Committee, today we are in the process of selecting a new Western Regional Council of Governments director. I sat through all-day interviews, and there are some really smart people out there, and in the next week or 2 weeks, I anticipate we'll be making some kind of an announcement. And that's all I have. So moving on to City Council consent item. A little bit of housekeeping. Need to read this statement. All items listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and may be enacted by one motion. Prior to the motion to consider any action by the council, any public comments on any of the consent items will be heard. There will be no separate action unless members of the council or the audience request specific items to be removed from the consent calendar. Items removed from the consent calendar will be separately considered under item number 3 of the agenda. First off, are there any public comments wishing to pull?
No public comments for the consent calendar.
Do I have any council members wishing to pull consent items?
2D, please.
2D? Anyone else? Greg?
I'll make a motion to approve the rest.
Second.
The remaining.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Alleman?
Yes.
Councilmember Grummeyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoffman?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newton?
Yes.
Mayor Bash? Motion passes unanimous.
Councilwoman Grunmeyer? D?
Yeah, it's just I guess for housekeeping more than anything else, on city paperwork, when we're going to be holding those that place bids accountable to mathematical errors and making sure their paperwork is correct, we should make sure that our paperwork is correct and doesn't have typos and misspellings in it. So like on page 12, it says, note, mathematical errors will be grounds for unresponsive bids. Like we didn't even spell that right. So I just want to make sure, I know you guys are going through stacks and stacks of paperwork and things like that, but on a project where we've had to send it out a couple of times for like teeny tiny little math errors, I just want to make sure that we're showing our due diligence and making sure that all of our stuff is correct as well. Because you have council that's going through, you know, our packets and reading all of these things, and again, typos and things happen, but this project, it's like the third round. So just making sure we're being diligent with that kind of stuff, even when we're tired or frustrated or whatever else may be going on.
Thank you. Motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Alleman?
Yes.
Councilmember Grummeyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoffman? Mayor Pro Tem Newton? Mayor Bash?
Yes.
Motion
Danny,
passes unanimous.
thank you. Could you please read, moving on to public comments, can you please read the public comment rules and announce any public comments that are to be read?
Yes. This is the time where persons in the audience wishing to address the city council regarding matters not on the agenda may speak. Please complete the speaker card in the back of the room and present it to the city clerk so that you may be recognized. For those viewing the meeting, you may email the city clerk at citycouncil@ci.norco.ca.us, or you may phone in at this time at 951-582-5557. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. The Ralph M. Brown Act limits the City Council's ability to respond to comments on non-agendized matters at the time such comments are made. The City Council shall not discuss or take action relative to any general public comment.
Do we have any public comments on the phone or any to be read?
Yes. Moment. Do we have any comments in the queue? No callers at the queue. I do have 3 in-person comments.
Okay.
First one is Ronald Mugar.
Evening, Council.
Good evening, how are you?
Excuse me. I'm here I was sent here by my attorney to read what he's put down, but I'm not much one for begging for mercy on anything. If somebody's screwed up, I believe they should suffer the consequences. In my case, I screwed up a little bit, but not to the tune of $104,000 in attorney's fees, which is going to come down on me as a lien on my house, and the attorneys that the city hired are going to end up with all that money, and it's not going to do any good for anybody in this community, and it's going to take me out completely. I've lived in my home for 32 years. I worked pretty much my life to pay off my house and get it so I didn't have to have a lot of money to pay when I retired, and that worked out pretty good. But now I'm faced with a big bill on top of my life savings that went during this case that these attorneys had against me. I lost $50,000 in attorney's fees. And one thing that really bothers me is the council's never heard my side of the story. I applied to tell my side of the story to the council, and I was denied once. maybe twice, I'm not sure. And it wasn't too long after that that one of the head inspector for the city here found out what was going on. He gave me a call and told me to come down and get a permit to get rid of all this. And I did that. He came in and inspected it, and it was over. He gave me I didn't do anything to the structure that they were telling me that was unpermitted and unreasonable. I didn't do anything to it. It was inspected and passed with flying colors. So I've got in my hand here a letter here begging for mercy, and I'm not begging for anything. What I want you to do is just look at my side of the case optimistically and pessimistically and reasonably, and see if I did something that requires my house to be taken away from me. I raised 5 kids there. I've got one of my kids are here with me, supporting me, and I just don't want to lose my house. And I will if this thing goes on. And you guys have the authority to waive all these fees. There's some people in here that don't agree with that, but if you look at it close, it's not fair. And I believe that you're in a position where you would like to do the fair thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening.
Next speaker is Bill Naylor.
Good evening, Council. Interesting thing occurred a couple of weeks ago. I received an email from Waste Management wanting to know what my evaluation of their services for our residents was, and I've completed that for them and did a pretty good evaluation for them. Now, fast forward about 2 weeks, and I noticed a couple of my trash bins or manure bins actually, had some major cracks in them, and I was concerned that when the truck comes along and wants to pick them up, they're going to crush them, and then we're going to have manure all over the street. And I know that they really are not geared for cleaning that up. They're going to leave it for me to go back out the street and clean it up. I would need the bins to put it in. So what I did is what I do in the past over the years is call them up and say, hey, we've got a couple of bins that need changing out. And they were very nice. I will tell you, just fantastic people to call and talk to. But what happens is I called them last week, said, well, this is what the situation, okay. They go through the rigmarole of how you take care of it. I did do that, left them out for them. Monday, they came by. Our work order says you have 2 household trash cans to remove. We do not have any extra manure bins with us. And of course, I said, well, that's fine. Let's just call the office and get them straightened out so you can come back in the next couple of days or whatever and do it. Of course, they usually don't deliver them except on Mondays. And I'm saying, I don't mind. I'll put the stuff in there. But who's going to clean it up if they get crushed? I called the office again. They said, no. Our work order says you did ask for the manure bins. We'll call dispatch. Now, this was on Monday afternoon. We'll wait for a call back from dispatch, and then we'll call you right back. Never got a call. So on Tuesday afternoon, I did the same thing. I called them, explained to them, yes, no, we see this. You should be getting a call, but we'll send them again. And again, no response. I've explained to them that I think there's a solution to this, and when they send out those drivers with the trucks or with the trailers to drop off bins and such, they could always stack just a few extra of the different kinds of bins that they need just in case they run across a problem. Because when I did talk to the delivery guy, he said this happens all the time. And manure is one thing, it builds up and you've got it to get rid of. Household trash and such, in our case, we can go a couple of weeks if we had to. But I just thought I would let you know that this customer service, at least the public part, is great, but they're just not accomplishing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Next speaker is Bonnie Slager.
Hi, Bonnie.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. I usually don't go the other side of the freeway from where I live, but the last week or so I've driven 2nd Street several times, and over where the Palomino Business Park is going to be on 2nd Street, it looks, I've got to think of a word I can use. How about bad? The boarded up houses, the unkept yards. I have been told by a resident in that area that there are people breaking into the backs of these houses and that there's getting to be an element that isn't real good for that neighborhood. And so I'd like to know how soon before those houses are going to be removed. It's just a terrible eyesore. And 2nd Street, because it becomes what Lincoln, there's a lot of traffic through there, and it really looks bad. I hope you can get it cleaned up soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Just as a FYI, I spoke to Patrick 2 days ago, and you guys may have already talked to him. His contract, the demo contract, has been let. So there's a demo contract. It's in process. Okay.
And I do have one email comment I will have to read into the record
Great.
that just came in. And here we go. To City Council of Norco. This last week, I've noticed that the speed indicator sign on California Avenue have been removed. Living on California Avenue for the past 40-plus years, traffic and the speed of traffic has always been a problem. I was wondering why. Do they not work because no one paid attention to them? Trust me, I would watch people leaving 7th Street at a rate of speed that I believe they just wanted to see how fast they could make the sign read. Too fast. What is the next plan of attack to lower the amount of cars that speed down the street? Best solution is to have the sheriff's patrol like they do on 6th Street. They might even find the drivers that drive on the horse trail so they can pass cars that are waiting to pull in their driveways. Yep, I've seen that too many times. Help. Thank you, L. Schwab. And that's all public comment we have.
Okay, thank you. Closing public comments. Moving on to legislative matters. No new evidence will be heard from the public as the public hearing has been closed regarding the items listed. Zone Code Amendment 2020-5, Ordinance Number 1067, second reading, City of Norco. A proposal to amend Norco Municipal Code NMC Section 18.30.46 Accessory Dwelling Units to update the requirements for accessory dwelling units, ADUs. City Clerk, I need a motion to approve.
This is Ordinance Number 1067, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Norco, California, amending Norco Zoning Code Section 183046, accessory dwelling units to update the requirements for accessory dwelling units, ADUs, by replacing the existing verbiage in its entirety, Zone Code Amendment 2020-05.
Do I hear a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
A second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Alleman?
Yes.
Councilmember Grummeyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoffman?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newton?
Yes.
Mayor Bash?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you.
Moving on to public hearing. Order of public hearing will be 1, staff presentation, 2, council questions of staff, 3, open public hearing, 3A, public speakers in favor, against, neutral, 4, closed public hearing, 5, council discussion and action. Moving on to 6A, Code Amendment 2021-03, Ordinance Number 1068, first reading, City of Norco. Do I read? Yep, go.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. This agenda item 6A is a code amendment 2021-03 and related ordinance number 1068. And this code amendment that's before you is intended to amend the contents of Chapter 5.16 of our Norco Municipal Code that is currently titled Solicitors. The amendment includes replacing the title of solicitors to a new title entitled Solicitors, Sidewalk, and Roadside Vendors. It's also intended to clarify the provisions solicitors and roadside or motorized vendors and to add provisions regulating sidewalk vendors to comply with SB 946. This code amendment is also intended to amend several sections of Title V to change the reference to a specific dollar amount in Title V of the Municipal Code and to read as specified in the adopted fee resolution. In a summary of SB 946, it specifically addresses vendors in terms of sidewalk vendors. This Senate Bill 946 basically prohibits limits or the prohibition of sidewalk vendors in the city of Norco. Specifically, it does allow for regulations and prohibition of sidewalk vending in certain circumstances. Sorry, I need to lower this. And this includes stationary vending at a park that it has an existing concessionary agreement. It allows the cities to prohibit stationary vending in residential zones. And it allows what is called referred as distance requirements from special events that are either city approved for city functions or private special events. In certain circumstances, also, this sidewalk vending ordinance or Senate bill allows the city to limit vending in certain circumstances with respect to location of where the vendor is situated, and this is all in the benefit of health, safety, and welfare concerns within the community. The Senate bill allows cities to require a permit to allow street vending in the city. As far as the new ordinance is, or the revisions to the ordinance is intended to bring our vending ordinance in compliance with Senate Bill 946. And just to kind of give you a little bit of just a summary, that way, we can take a look at and discuss the ordinance. The new ordinance will bring, as I indicated, the Norco Municipal Code into compliance with state law mandate while providing rules for sidewalk vendors to maintain the health, safety, and welfare of the community. The following, and I'm just going to kind of briefly discuss a little bit of the highlights in the proposed ordinance. In order to preserve the safety of equestrian traffic, sidewalk vending will not be allowed on horse trails. All sidewalk vendors are required to obtain a sidewalk vending permit, and in the ordinance, it does specify the required submittals to be able to obtain a sidewalk vending permit. And as part of the sidewalk vending permit, the applicant must show compliance with other state licensing requirements, such as a health permit. Items that may be sold by the sidewalk vendor are limited to those items listed in the sidewalk vending permit and approved by the city. Roaming sidewalk vending is required to be allowed, although it can, the ordinance provides that such vending in residential zone is limited to hours from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. One thing I'd like to point out is that stationary vendors are not allowed in the residential zone, and this prohibition is allowed per the Senate bill. Sidewalk vending is limited to an approved cart. Let's see. Sidewalk vendors must maintain a clean and sanitized operation, including pickup trash and maintenance of a neat sanitary appearance of the vendor cart and whatever is being sold. Sidewalk vendors shall display copies of all city permits and county permits. All signage related to vending must be attached to the vending cart. Vendors may not do business with persons in motorized vehicles. Non-motorized sidewalk vending is not intended to be a drive-up business. All signs related to the vending operation must be attached to the cart, and carts may not be left or stored overnight in any public property. And the ordinance proposed also identifies administrative citation and fines as limited by SB 946. And the citations that were specifically listed in SB 946 have basically verbatim been put into our municipal code or proposed municipal code ordinance. The update to the municipal code, as I indicated, are intended to comply with the regulation and limitations of SB 946 with the intent of protecting the health and safety of our community, pedestrian movement on sidewalks, and of course our equestrian trails. see here. As I indicated earlier, the code amendment also clarifies the provisions for solicitors, basically saying that solicitors are required to get a business license and there's limitations for hours of operation. And it also clarifies the provision for motorized vendors, or for example, like an ice cream truck. Just the ordinance clarifies hours of operation and basically says that these motorized vendors, such as an ice cream truck, are allowed only in residential zones. Let's see. And with that, I will conclude. That was just a brief overall summary of what's included in the ordinance.
Do we have any questions for Alma? Greg?
Yes.
Hi, Alma.
Yes, hi.
Good report.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions so I can understand a little bit better. In our existing ordinance, to be revised,
yes.
I'll call this 5.16.030, no peddlers or no solicitor signs, which is in our existing ordinance. And if I go to the revised section, that's on page 2, it doesn't really address, to me, no peddlers or no solicitor signs.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
And so I guess what I'm missing, the point is that if I have a sign on my property or any of our neighbors that say, no peddlers, right, no solicitors, in the new ordinance, is that the signs don't mean anything? Am I looking at this correctly?
You are, yes. And that's something that I can definitely include into the new ordinance.
Okay, so I would just make a note and see if the majority of council wants to have that type of signage.
Well, generally speaking, and when they can have them up, of course, that's a private decision from each homeowner. They can have them up. It doesn't change the fact that they have to comply, but to be specific in the ordinance, we should probably add it. I can put that in there to address that.
Okay. I mean, if I'm looking at what we're proposing, it's basically saying we couldn't enforce the sign.
I see what you're saying, yes.
Yeah,
so
that's
yes,
kind of where
that makes
I'm
sense.
going.
Yeah, that should be easy. It could just be added as part of the
Okay, and then the next one, which kind of surprised me, was this is our existing existing ordinance, 5.16.080, and this talks about sound. Whenever any such sound can be heard for a distance greater than 300 feet. I swear that I never knew that what our existing ordinance is saying is we couldn't have like the ice cream truck.
You're probably right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, to me, that's the sound of summer, so that should be allowed. So I just want to make sure that we're not, where we've gone back now to 516.080, I believe no sound is addressed.
Yes, you're referring to like an ice cream truck?
Specifically to that.
Yeah, if you go to.
But it looks like, once again, that's going back to that same section.
Yeah.
It doesn't address any other sounds.
Something is like an ice cream truck, like a motorized ice cream truck, would fall under the category of section 5.16040. That doesn't make the prohibition on the sound.
Okay.
Yeah. And for that same reason, that's how you're going to know it's coming around.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondered.
Yeah.
I really didn't realize we prevented that. And then I think just kind of my last questions right now. Under requirements, business license, et cetera, proof of liability insurance, what's the amount of liability insurance we're going to require?
That's a good question.
Because I hope it's not what we require for public works.
That is to be determined.
That is to be determined, yes.
Has not been determined. It depends on the situation. That is not included in the ordinance. That will be determined based on the specific application.
Okay.
In
For a
the
typical
1 million to aggregate.
Just a million?
Yeah, but that's what we have in the parks section. But that's under permit review right now.
That's correct. But again, this one, I'm not going to say it's going to be $2 million for application to do sidewalk vending.
Right.
I think we're going to look at the application and determine what is the appropriate liability insurance.
Do we know what other jurisdictions charge? Or
We haven't looked at that, but it's something certainly we'll be looking at as we review and see what will be appropriate for each specific
All right.
situation.
Thank you.
That's all? Thank you, Greg. Catherine? Oh, Robin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good.
All right, thank you, Alma. I have a few questions. Under the enforcement fine, so it's 5.16.09, what is the collection mechanism for fines for violations? Is it the same as everything else? Okay. And then also on page 7 of the ordinance, letter Q, so on that same page, it talks about operation in a city-owned or operated park. If the operator of the park has a signed agreement for concessions that exclusively permits the sale of food or merchandise, do we have any of those existing currently at any of our park facilities?
We have agreements with Little League and Girls Softball for concessions. And so what we would look at is non-competitive type of uses in that situation. But currently, no, only under special events do we issue a permit for that. But in the park section, there's a list of requirements that they must meet in order to be given a permit for those type of concessions versus what is identified here. So this would refer them to our section of the code.
But would it? I'm not trying to be facetious. Like, does one section of the municipal code supersede or go over another? Because if I'm a vendor and I'm going to look at this, by reading that rule, the only thing I feel like I would need to check is if there's some type of agreement, and if there's not, I can go up to Pikes Peak and push my cart around to all the walkers and sell whatever I have, the way that I read this.
In the park code, it requires anyone who is vending, selling, or doing any type of business within a park must pull a permit from the city. So during that process, if they were vending, selling of any kind, they would have to go through our permit process, which would require insurance, would require all the things that are in here, health permit, any of those things that are required. And that's in the park code section. If they didn't do that, then they would be subject to citation.
Right, but what I'm saying, they're going to follow.
Supersede this.
Well, not even that. What you're asking, we already are saying they have to do in this code as well. So as per this, if it potentially passes, if I'm going to go take a walk at Pikes Peak, am I going to potentially run into sidewalk vendors selling their wares at Pikes Peak Park? Yes or no? If they meet all the requirements that are in this code.
Yes, they could.
Okay.
The difference would be is the permit would come through our office versus building and safety or for planning.
See, and I do have a question about what supersedes which, because now we're just going to create an interdepartmental headache. So does anybody over here have an answer?
We had a discussion with the city attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Our understanding is this ordinance does not impact current rules regarding anyone selling at city parks. Now, in other words, this does not. Direction was that whatever requirements currently exist with respect to selling on the city parks is still in.
Okay, we'll wait and see how that plays out then later.
I think that this one is more of the public right-of-way, and if you were to pull a permit through the parks, you would come to our office for that process. If someone came to Alma's office and said, hey, we have a cart or whatever, we want to do it in a park, she would refer them to us for that permit processing.
Okay. The next question is on page 8 of the ordinance, letter C. It talks about being subject to fines and then requesting an ability to pay determination, again, probably as per government code. And it said that the city manager or his or her designee would be determining the ability to pay determinations. I'm going to guess there could potentially be several of these requests presented should people be cited. So what staff member are we going to be burdening with making the determinations on the ability to pay that will come in?
Well, assuming, that'll probably be in the hands of the planning department. So we will be signing off on the business license for the street vendor, and of course, whenever they're cited, it usually comes from code enforcement, so that would fall under my jurisdiction.
Okay. The next one on page 9, it talks about that the city may remove the cart and/or dispose of the cart. Looking at carts and public nuisances. So my next question would be, under what mechanisms would the city be able to collect a cart? Where would the cart be stored? How are we going to store it? Because we have to hold it for at least 30 days to be able to return it. And I think about, right now we have code enforcement in like a little car, but we're going to go potentially confiscate carts. And then we have code enforcement officers that work independently. How is one person going to potentially load these carts? And so what mechanisms are in place for that part of enforcement?
That's something that we will have to analyze further and have a protocol in place should that situation occur. We may have to, enlist the services or the help of some of perhaps Public Works.
We've had that scenario happen before with homeless issues, and what normally happened, like on a weekend, code enforcement would be removing that materials. They would call after hours, and we would assist them to remove that material out of the public right of way, and we're required to store it. And we normally would store it at our public yard until the city attorney tells us we can get rid of it, or until they claim it.
Okay. And then, so the next question is like on letter B, again on page 9, it talks about we can hold perishable items for 24 hours, 48 hours for non-perishable for recovery by the legal owner. So am I to assume that almost all of this stuff would go to Public Works, and/or I guess this might be a question for the city attorney, if it's perishable and within 24 hours it spoils or is unusable, does the city incur any liability for not returning the product in the condition which it was taken? Like, do we have to refrigerate perishable items to return those items to somebody in the condition in which we took them?
No, I don't think we do, as long as we give proper notice that the items have been taken. If we leave notice at the site and say you need to pick up your items within a certain amount of time, or they'll be held for a certain amount of time, like 30 days, and the person knows that there's perishable goods and decides they're not going to go down to the yard for 5 days, and in that time the items have spoiled, the person had notice, time to pick up the items, and they didn't do it, so in that case they would be the ones who caused the items to spoil.
Okay, because in here it's saying 24 hours. I'm just thinking the fruit cart, the flower person, those types of things, those items have to be refrigerated or they'll spoil within the 24-hour window.
I'm not aware of any court holding that we have an obligation to do that. And there's actually some cases out on seizure of marijuana, and so far they haven't imposed an obligation on government entities to put marijuana in some kind of a sealed container.
Okay. And then also, On letter A, the last statement, it says any violation of this chapter is declared to be unlawful and a public nuisance, but then you go down to C, and that statement is repeated.
Okay.
So do we just need to delete that statement on letter A and just leave it as letter C, standalone? Again, it's on page 9.
I see it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the last thing, what tools or, I guess for lack of a better term, what tools are we going to provide to our staff for them to have the ability to hold our residents and guests of our community accountable to these codes?
That's a good question. Basically, I mean, a lot of it's going to be complaint driven. And our code enforcement officers, when they're out and about and see a violation, they will be able to, enforce it based on this ordinance. But that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you.
Ted?
Thank you. I'm assuming on page 2 of your beginning, Alma, that you're talking these roaming sidewalk vending is required. Are those ice cream trucks? And it's like
No. On what page are you referring to?
on the second page of your staff report.
Oh, yeah.
You're defining these roaming sidewalk vendings.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking that is you have these hours from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Do we have to allow that all year? And the reason I say that is in the wintertime, 8 o'clock at night, are we allowing, I'm trying to be safety here. It's dark. And I know you referred back to Senate Bill 946, but does it give a specific time? Because what I'm reading here in the chapter 459, page 4 of that, is a limitation on hours of operations that are not unduly restricted in non-residential areas, maybe limit for other businesses in there. But I don't see where it says from that time, unless you can point that to me. Why are we allowing them to be out there at 8 o'clock at night in the wintertime? Is there any reason why that time was picked?
Well, the best way to answer that is that the Senate bill does not, basically what it says is that we can't restrict the peddlers or the sidewalk vendors to hours that aren't allowed for other businesses. We just can't. So we figured, we have to put a limit somehow, and not to just let them be out there, all the time. If the council, desires to limit it better in the interest of the public safety and welfare, of course, that's something that I'm sure could be considered.
This is a real safety issue for me.
Okay.
For people walking around, it's dark, especially if they're in residential areas, peddling. And they're out there, and kids crossing the street. We don't have street lights all over the place. And I've got some more issues on this, but we need to. This shouldn't be in the hours of wintertime when it's dark at 8 o'clock. And personally, I want to see that restricted to hours of daylight or some type of daylight instead of out the middle of the night. And then when I'm reading this thing. And here's an interesting thing, and this is probably more at Colin, because I want to throw this at you. We don't allow the safety of equestrian traffic, sidewalk vending will not be allowed in the horse trails. What's the definition of our horse trails in our municipal code?
Pedestrian and equestrian trails.
Pedestrians, equestrians, and bicycle people, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. If you're not going to allow them, now this Senate bill says you have to have a sidewalk. We don't have sidewalks except for on Hamner Avenue and a few other choice places in town. So that means no one can vend anywhere in the street, any of our trails out there on our horse trails. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying, and this is going to come back down to, I'm not an attorney, and nor do I stay at a Holiday Inn, okay? But I can tell you that this needs to go back and be revisited by the city attorneys or attorney, because you're going to leave us out hanging on somebody saying that our horse trails are pedestrian and so-called sidewalks are Norco sidewalk, and he's going to say, why can't I drive down there and sell? I don't want to be in that position. I'm throwing this out because I can see Lieutenant Rowan's people. I can see Kathy and Javier out there getting in an argument about this over the situation, and that's why we need clarification on it. Where do we define our sidewalks?
I'll take it back to him for reconsideration, but I don't think we have had situations where people are actually vending on the horse. That happening in the city anywhere?
It's going to happen, and we need to be prepared for it. That's why I'm just pointing this out.
The vendors that are actually addressed in this ordinance are more future vendors, because we don't really have legitimate vendors coming to town that are push cart, etc. What we do have are flower and a few fruit vendors who are basically bootleg in their status, and they will, land anywhere. Wherever their handler delivers them, that's where they'll be. So yes, this last weekend, there was one in the horse trail, and when I got the report, I went to speak with her, but she ran away because she knew she wasn't supposed to be there. But typically, they will be on a corner, and it's not on the horse trail side because somebody, has pretty much let them know that. This isn't going to address that because they aren't not the type that are going to come in and pull a business license. So, but in general, the only one time I've ever seen a legitimate vendor was about 2 years ago, was on Hamner, and he did set up on the sidewalk. He did have a county license, and he knew a lot of the law, but that's the only one in 3 years that I've actually run up against.
I don't want to put us in that position, so that's where I'm at on that. But the hours, I'm really serious. We need to relook at those hours on that, unless some members of the council want to agree to change it right here on that. The other thing, so this would apply to the on and off ramps by the freeway or not? Alma? It would or would not? She's shaking her head no.
Sorry, whether or
the
not
on and off ramps at the freeway.
It should, yes.
Okay, so the people, how far, this is going to throw, because CHP is not going to enforce this.
I don't think you can force on Caltrans.
No, if it's Caltrans, then it's correct.
Yeah.
This is Caltrans property. And the reason I say is because when the complaints come, they either come through the RSO dispatch or she gets one to complain about that. So I'm just trying to just get a situation where our residents know that that's a Caltrans responsibility rather than calling. But there has to be a point where the jurisdiction takes over, where our jurisdiction takes over. And that's got to be defined. How does this apply to food trucks? They just set up in parking lots? Yes or no? None?
No, well, under this ordinance, it doesn't address that, so it wouldn't be allowed.
And we're not going to address food trucks and they set up in a parking lot just in the same facility where there's a brick and mortar business?
It wouldn't be allowed.
We'll have to talk because there's a gentleman in Hamner who's doing it now. Okay, so that's why I said we got to protect our established brick and mortar. And this comes back to the other thing. Are we just doing these as reactive, or is this going to be a proactive enforcement? proactive means that our code enforcement officers can on-site the activity versus just getting a call for complaint.
Well, the intent is basically for both. I mean, if our code enforcement officer is driving by and there's a situation where, number one, I mean, it's not safe and it's in violation of the ordinance that is eventually adopted, then yes, absolutely.
Okay, I just want to be clear as what we're doing here is, used to be that our code enforcement wouldn't do anything unless there was a complaint issued. I'm okay with an on-site proactive approach. Okay, so it means that they're out doing their job, and that's one thing, but it used to be that wasn't the case, and I'm just trying to clarify this. So that was, and the other thing, and I know this because it happened in San Jacinto, happened in Lake Elsinore, the parks, like Robin said, they will be there. They will take their little cart, their little trucks with their little trailers hooked to them, and they'll drive right up. They'll unload their carts from ice cream to anything else they can sell, their juices, their fruit, and they will walk around the sidewalk up at Pikes Peak Park vending. And it's a public sidewalk, or is it a park? That's something that we have to clarify.
Park.
If they're inside the park and they're doing that, then they will be required to have a permit.
Okay, my point on this thing is we don't want to make it too complicated. We want to keep it simple for people to understand. And because I've seen that happen in those cities, that's exactly what happened. And luckily that this Senate bill comes through. It clarifies a lot, but again, I think we're going to run into a problem with the sidewalk issue with our dirt horse trails. But thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Catherine?
A couple of things just to respond to a question that another council member asked, Councilmember Hoffman. The Senate bill says upon a public sidewalk or other pedestrian path. So I had asked the same question to Andy about the horse trails. I don't know for safety if it can be regulated because it could be dangerous because of the horses. But in terms of, we don't have a lot of sidewalks, but we do have areas that are not horse trail that are dirt. Would that be considered a pedestrian path? Because that's where I have seen people set up. I have never seen anyone set up on a actual sidewalk because I don't have any sidewalks really in my part of town. But I have seen them on corners that are dirt.
You mean, or like opposite
They're not on the horse trail because there's not a horse trail there, but it's not a sidewalk, right? So I would say that that's a pedestrian path, no? Because it's the dirt that goes along the houses.
Dad, would you say it is pedestrian?
It's a complicated question because, again, we're not a traditional city with traditional curb and gutter and sidewalk. We have in many cases, we have an extended public right-of-way, which really this state requirement covers that entire area. It's the public right-of-way, which is different than the parks or on private property. So it's that area you're dealing with and trying to figure out where's the area you want to allow them to safely vend versus others. In this case, we unfortunately don't have we have some areas where you have a parkway where it's just dirt, but then you have a trail next to it. So they could theoretically safely vend in the dirt in the parkway because there's no bushes or anything there, but we may not want them in the trail section. Other areas where there's bushes in the parkway and they can't put any material there, and they would logically think of, well, I'll go in the open space, which is the trail. There is nothing other than preventing motorized vehicles in our code. It says you cannot have motorized vehicles down the trails. But if they're doing a push cart or something like that, that isn't something that we would go out and cite for because they're pushing a cart. So it is complicated because how the city is set up. We only have a limited amount of actual sidewalk. I would venture to say a lot of the activity that I have seen is predominantly around the freeways in those busy areas where they're getting most traffic. It's not really anticipated to be in areas where it's strictly residential, unless it's potentially near a school. That's an area where they frequently would do
I've
it.
seen everyone off Second.
Yeah.
That's where I've seen the majority of PN. And I mean, they've never bothered me.
Yeah.
I mean, but they haven't been on a horse trail, but they are not on a sidewalk.
Right. So they certainly, you'll see them when you're having the parades. They'll be going up and down the trails, that kind of process, and trying to take advantage of the group. So I don't know. And again, it's a tough legal question because again, it is a pedestrian equestrian trail or pathway, even for bicycles, obviously. So where that leads us into regards to the applicability of restricting that, I don't know.
I think that we need more clarity and legality in terms of regulation of the horse trail for safety. Food trucks. So I want to have a food truck at my house. I can't have a food truck parked on the street in my residential neighborhood, correct?
Motorized?
Yes.
That is correct. You cannot.
Okay. Sidewalk vending. No stationary sidewalk vending in residential areas. So no lemonade stands.
Correct. The intent is to, in the residential zones, to keep moving.
Right.
not
But
just
so
set up
if
shop.
there was a kid who had a lemonade stand and somebody called code enforcement on them, they would be subject to a $250 fine if they did not have liability insurance and a business permit.
This might fall under the same rule of many Girl Scouts have banned license for it. I think the ordinances need to be given a reasonable interpretation. Read literally, it would prohibit a lemonade stand. Oftentimes you have to use some discretion when
Okay, I'm going to come back to that when we have our discussion. Okay. No selling anything. I'm going to come to Girl Scouts next. Within 25 feet of a building, structure, or facility. So that means no Girl Scouts selling cookies in front of Stater Brothers. Sorry, it's 51680. I. Sorry, letter I, Alma.
516 here. Let me lower this.
51680, letter I apologize.
Okay.
It says within 25 feet of an entrance or exit to a building, structure, or facility. So that's any building, right? Not just city buildings?
Pretty much everybody will build.
So that would mean even with permission, the code says that they can't do that.
The literal, like our city attorney said, literal interpretation.
Right. I want to literally interpret the code though, right? Because, yeah, okay. And then just to clarify for the amounts in the fines, these are the maximum amounts set forth by the Senate bill.
Yes.
So the fines are not required to be these amounts. It's just the maximum we could do.
That is correct.
Okay. And then let me see, I think I have one more. Just to answer another council member had asked a question, I did some research. I saw some other cities who require liability insurance, and they either didn't state or they said, a lot of them said 100,000. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple questions. So the Caltrans, my understanding is it's actually illegal for them to vend on Caltrans property, but currently right now there's a policy that says hands off. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of Caltrans being hands-off on their right-of-way.
We're told, so can we enforce this on Caltrans property?
We wouldn't enforce it on Caltrans property because it falls out of our jurisdiction, and there's the delineation of city property versus Caltrans would be an engineering document. And there would be a document that says exactly where that line is.
So, but my point is that we're not supposed to touch the homeless and we're not supposed to touch the vendors. I understand there's a policy that says we're not allowed to do that?
I'm only aware of the policy related to homeless.
Okay, well, but we're not allowed to go on the so in other words, the off-ramps, things like that, we're not allowed to touch the vendors. Correct? I just want to make sure.
If it's city property, yes.
Well, I'm talking about Caltrans property.
It would be, if it's off our property, then yes, we should not issue a city administrative citation for somebody vending on that area.
Okay. Just to clarify, does it make any difference that we have A1 properties as opposed to R1 properties? So in other words, an A1 property is still a residential neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean by code?
Correct.
Okay. okay, so there's a flower vendor on the corner. She's selling flowers. She's on our property. And what would be, so our code enforcement person would walk up and say, show me your business license, show me your liability insurance, and if they can't, and they refuse to leave, or if they leave, do we just tell them to leave? Do we write them a citation and then take their stuff? What's the process?
Well, in light that our current code enforcement officer has dealt with a situation like that, they basically a lot of times they don't have any identification, so it's very tough to write a citation. We basically we've taken some stuff and told them, hey, you can come get it at City Hall or whatever, but they don't show up. So it's kind of that's one of the big issues that we have encountered in the past. So
that's how we're enforcing it. This isn't for me, this is for people watching our meeting.
Yeah, and I mean, they're there, code enforcement shows up. Unfortunately, they can't cite because there's no identification.
Right.
They leave.
So they just tell them to move on.
They leave, and if they don't take their stuff, well, we basically collect it.
All right. And that's the same with toys, food, all that kind of stuff, correct? If they're selling illegally, same with everything. I'm with Ted. I think that 10 to 6 is appropriate. I can't imagine somebody even in, if you decide to go with daylight, you can have people out there at 9 o'clock at night during the summer, but I think it should be 10 to 6. Is there any violation for the purchasers? So if you buy flowers?
No,
Yeah.
not in here.
Okay. Lions Club, that's under Parks. Girl Scouts, if we really have to spell all that stuff out, I don't know if we need to do that, but if council feels that way about lemonade stands. The thing I want to say about most of this is that these laws are misguided because there's the myth that these are people that are just trying to make a living. They're just trying to make a couple bucks, and they're actually trafficked. They're trafficked. The vast majority have handlers, and they're trafficked. And if they don't come back with a certain amount of money, or if they get in too much trouble, they're in trouble. And they take these people and they put 50 of them in a house, and every morning they send them out. And when we had I always forget her name, Iris Simple, was that her name? Opal. It's really true. If you look around, you can actually see the handler. You can't always see him, but you see him sitting in that van. And the reality is these are trafficked, these are slaves. And so we're not doing them any favors. We're not only hurting our own businesses, which I don't know how much we are, but you're actually helping the traffickers to make lots and lots of money. And the truth is, I don't understand the legislature. Why don't they know that? They pass these laws and they're helping slave traders. So I just really feel that the harder, and it's terrible because I feel bad for these people, but we need to figure out how to stop this trade. And I know, Kathy, you have a really hard job, and I feel bad for you, and sometimes, and some of these people, they just break my heart. They're out there selling flowers, it's 100-degree heat, and they're going to go home to maybe they're controlled by not having enough food. That is the reality of this, and so it's just really upsetting to me. Do we have any cards on this issue? Opening public comments.
Excuse me, I have one speaker card, Bonnie Slager. And then I do have emails to read.
Great.
And then also, if you would like to call in, after the emails are read, you can call in to 951-582-5557.
Great. Let's start with Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie. How are you?
As far as the push cart vendors, the thing that I've seen the most is when we have a parade on 6th Street, and they're not on the horse trail because it's too hard to push the cart on the horse trail, but they're in the street. And even after the parade starts, they're still going back and forth, and I'm trying to watch the parade, and here goes these push carts back and forth trying to sell things during the parade. And of course, I have no idea if any of these people have the permits or not, but it seems like somehow, if you're going to allow push carts on 6th Street during a parade, when there's going to be a parade, they should have to stop once the parade begins and not be wandering around on the street, particularly since we do have so many horses in the parades, and one of them could really get mowed down, or, you know, the carts or whatever. So I don't know if you can address this specifically or what you think, but having them trying to sell things while the parade is going on seems to be not a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Anybody calling yet?
I have nobody in the queue. We have nobody in the queue yet. I'll go ahead and read the council emails we received
Thank you.
since the beginning of the meeting. The first one, respected council members, my husband and I moved to Norco for a more libertarian animal keeping lifestyle, and especially appreciate the privacy and freedom we enjoy here. It is disappointing, therefore, to hear that the council is considering a financial attack on certain members of our community during this difficult economic time. Street vendors are trying to make a living like the rest of us and should be free to do so as long as they aren't disruptive. I've never seen a vendor disrespect our residential neighborhood. They run quiet, clean businesses, raising money for their families. On the Cinco de Mayo, I hope you will oppose this vaguely discriminatory effort. It's not a good enough reason. Who wants to pay for a permit and insurance to hire a food truck for their next party? The city squeezing its citizens for revenue isn't the Norco we love. Ashley Smith. The next person, here we go, is Jacob Deruvala. Members of the Norco City Council, I'm writing to you in opposition of the upcoming ordinance to establish sidewalk vending permits and liability insurance requirements for street vendors, an ordinance which attempts to establish more government bureaucracy over private enterprise without an actual problem to fix. As a Norconian who recently started keeping chickens and growing oranges, I'd like the option of selling my surplus from my front yard, a practice I have seen and come to love about Norco that is now threatened by this ordinance. Additionally, it's disingenuous for a business to claim unfair competition with street vendors who are not awarded the benefits of local chamber of commerce, government loans, or numerous advertising and operational advantages of having a brick and mortar location to sell products. If a street vendor is competing with them, it's their responsibility as business owner to update their methods of acquiring customers or selling products. Why would these business owners not join in on what must be a lucrative method of selling products? Because they believe it's easier for the government to eliminate the competition for them. This is entirely against the spirit of capitalism and fair market competition. As a Norconian, I support street vendors who are simply trying to make a living. They are productive members of our society who do not deserve the confiscation of their property or criminalization of their lifestyle. Signed, Jacob. I have one more. I am writing to express that I am not in favor of the city ordinance to regulate sidewalk vendors. First, the ordinance is a waste of time and resources. We do not have a prevalent vendor presence in Norco and accordingly should not be diverting resources to its regulation. Secondly, its restrictions would create undue burden on a range of individuals, from children running a lemonade stand to Girl Scouts selling cookies to vendors trying to earn an honest living. Symbolically, the proposed ordinance is overbearing regulation. A few weeks ago, I saw 2 officers seize a flower vendor's inventory, and several neighbors and I banded together to compensate her. Not only was there no ordinance in effect at the time to write such a ticket, she was not in a residential area. The officers were not wearing masks while interacting with her during a pandemic. Criminalizing vending does not improve our city and will instead create a culture of code enforcement where entrepreneurship is discouraged. Zachary Filia. And then I have one more speaker card, Bill Naylor.
I was trying to stay neutral on this issue. As many of you may know, that I was code enforcement for a city for many years, senior code enforcement officer, and I've had to deal with a lot of what you're talking about tonight. I agree with several of you council people that understand that a lot of these folks are being taken advantage of. But I really think you need to have an ordinance that can control the situation. I had to literally chase down vendors. I could never believe how fast a vendor can push a cart down the street and disappear. Sometimes would have 2 or 3 vendors lined up in a row trying to get citations issued to them. It was really a nightmare. And we actually did work very closely hand in hand with the police department. When they didn't have identification, they're pretty much required to have some kind of identification, so the police would have to deal with that. I hated to have to call in to have them do that because I could write the ticket, but sometimes we actually did have to call for backup for that purpose. The biggest issue I'm seeing right now in Norco is flower vendors on Caltrans property, right at the off-ramps to the freeway. And I've kind of tended to been call on it, but I haven't because I knew that Caltrans doesn't know to get involved with it. And also, what are you going to do? The state's kind of got your hands somewhat tied. We do need to do something. The code, I think you guys talked about several things here tonight that may need to be refined a little bit. I think you need to bring it back, and let's see if we can't work this out and get some of these issues dealt with. The Girl Scouts selling cookies in front of staters, I understand that. A lemonade stand, are we just going to say, well, we aren't looking at it? I know when I went to court on cases, I never lost a case because I treated everybody the same. And if you start picking and choosing who you want to cite, the courts are going to throw it out right now. So just some thoughts. Thank you.
Do we have any callers in the queue? Mayor, we have no further comment.
Closing public comments, bring it back to council. Anybody want to chime in? Go ahead, Ted.
I'll start down here. The one good thing, and to answer Bonnie's question on page 7 of her chapter 516 .080, it talks about prohibit areas where their vending will be prohibited. And Bonnie, no sidewalk vending is allowed more than 300 feet of a permitted special event during the duration, and that includes parades, concerts, and things like that. So that's a good thing on this. So that takes care of that. And then again, it said no stationary vendor, sidewalk vendor may be operated in a city-owned or city-operated park if the operator of the park has signed an agreement. For those of you who don't, during the horse shows up there, the ice cream vendor would come by, and I'm trying to think of the other guy who would come by. They would run through a little thing during up at Ingalls, drive around. They used to get chased away because you had Lions Club. They're selling, and that's what they were always under contract for, doing that. So you're right, Brian, but at least this is written down because that before was not written down. I'm still, and we can restrict this, Kevin, and like I said, to me, we do it for our noise ordinance. It's restricted from, not noise, our work ordinance, it's a noise, is when work can start versus daylight saving time versus Pacific Standard Time. There is a difference. So, but I still think that running around at 8 o'clock at night, I don't want to hear the good humor man running around in the middle of the night, but I remember the Helms Bakery truck used to come late at night on his route, and I didn't mind that. So I guess we have to set up some kind of criteria that we're not having vendors out and solicitors, because to be honest with you, after 7 o'clock at night, I don't want somebody knocking on my door to sell me solar or something like that. So I think we need to restrict it daylight time for safety for children and things like that. And so I'm kind of like you, Kevin. I don't think anybody should be out there after, and I don't know if we can do it by the hours of darkness. Colin, do you know?
It's better to do it by sunrise and sunset because those are set by the almanac, so it would have an objective resource to go to.
Okay, I'm good with that, but
Or maybe even an hour after sunset.
now you're getting complicated again.
Sunset.
It's-
Sunset's fine.
Keep it simple, because that's the people that have to enforce it, have to keep it simple.
We need a metric, and I believe the almanac talks about sunrise and sunset, and then I believe you can say something like 1 hour after sunset, and that is usually darkness.
Okay, I just don't want to run around in the dark. I'm worried about somebody getting hit in the street.
Yes.
Okay, but I still think that, and I don't, the rest of you think, maybe it isn't a problem to have them fend up there on the horse trails. And Kathy hasn't seen any, and Alma says there's not a problem. So I got to take one. And so if we think about this, we may have to come back to revisit this if we start seeing these guys run their little ice cream carts and their other carts up and down the street. Kevin, I am like you. I am concerned about the flower vendors. We have at least 5 or 6 flower vendors, flower shops in this town. Robin, is it 4 or 5? But we have two that are at least 2, and that's a tough business. And yes, we have some people that are doing it at their homes and doing that. They're running these out of the shop, but to me, we got to protect them. And I worked in an area, and Justin, you remember this quite well, right there in front of the Riverside National Cemetery during major holidays and Memorial Day. That was the biggest one. People would come in, Kevin, just like you're saying.
People have been hit in front of the National Cemetery.
In front of with a bobtail truck, sitting there, selling flowers out for the families of these members, and right down probably 400, 500 feet from there, there's a flower shop, and that person would come unglued. We don't need that. We got to protect our businesses in town. So I'm for you. The flower vendors are the ones that are probably the most visible. So we need to control that. And I don't like the idea that Caltrans has this idea hands off. But I know they've done that, and I agree with you. They've told us that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right.
So I just have, so I want to clarify something. One of the callers mentioned selling their wares in the front yard. So maybe we need, because we're trying to do the whole EAT program, maybe we need to make sure that that's allowed. And if people want to do something, now if it's private property like Stater Brothers, so Girl Scouts, I mean, I get it's probably not necessary, but would it be better to codify that selling Girl Scout cookies and things like that in front of a Stater Brothers? It's a private business. I mean, can we really enforce something at a private business that they can't sell something?
We can enforce laws on private businesses, but I think it would be, what you're saying is, should we codify it or make sure it's clear that persons can do this? I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so we need to codify that. We need to codify Boy Scouts. I mean, there was even a woman in front of her house whose daughter was, during COVID, she was selling cookies in front of her house. I bought a ton of them. Sorry, I guess there's no fine though, so I'm okay. But, so I suspect that Catherine's going to bring that up. Safety, Brian, so he brought up a good point that I knew, is that they're really not supposed to be at the parade, but wouldn't that come under a safety violation anyway? I mean, you can spook horses and all kinds of things, those kind of carts. I mean, I've seen them with the spinner wheels and...
When they've done it, and Bonnie's correct, it's hard to do it in the dirt or on the trail.
But I mean, I've seen them right along the side of the road during the parade.
Right, and typically they'll get pushed out, or we try to, but once the parade gets going, everybody's really busy, so there's really not enough people to enforce that type of situation.
I know.
But when we do get vendors call, we encourage them to pull a special event permit through planning, and this would allow them to be able to do it under certain conditions.
Yeah.
Except they couldn't do it in the trail. They'd have to be on a corner or somewhere where they would not be impeding pedestrian traffic.
Yeah.
Or equestrian traffic.
And then finally, I totally get that people think that these are people that are just going out and buying flowers. They drive downtown or they drive wherever you buy the flowers, and then they show up at Norco and they start selling their wares so they can feed their families. That's not true. It is not true. That what happens is that somebody else buys the flowers, they load a bunch of them up into a truck or into a van, they hand them a bunch of flowers, and they better sell them because they're controlled by food. This isn't feeding their families. They are literally trafficked human beings. Probably not all of them, but how are you going to tell the difference? Maybe the ones with the carts. This isn't like people just trying to feed their families. If that were the case, I would definitely be buying things from them, but unfortunately it's not. And so I think that if we can, and this is a discussion at the Western Regional Council of Governments we've had, the community services we've had. It's a lengthy discussion that every city is now beginning to understand where these flowers, particularly flowers, are actually coming from. And I mean, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, it's a real problem. The vast majority of these people are slaves. And so I think anything we can do to try to discourage the practice so it's not lucrative. And then, I don't know, Justin, you guys got your work cut out for you tracking these people down, don't you? It's hard. And I'm not saying anything that's not true, right? Yeah, so anyway, that's all I have. Somebody else? Somebody else want to codify something? Catherine, please.
I want to push back on a couple things. Talking about protecting our businesses, we can't, my interpretation of state law, we can't pass an ordinance to protect businesses. We can only pass an ordinance to regulate for health, safety, or welfare reasons. So while we may have received complaints and we may want to see our businesses succeed, that can't be the purpose of passing this ordinance. On my side of town, I live on I can't even think of which direction, the east side of the 15. I've seen a fruit guy. There used to be a fruit guy on the corner by the egg ranch with his stand. Sometimes there's somebody selling bonsai trees. And then just more recently, really, is when I've seen some of the flower vendors on our side of town. And I received a call. I've received several calls from residents one of the days because it was the day that there was someone on the corner selling flowers. And my understanding was the sheriff had been called, or whoever had been called, and so the sheriff went to attend the call. And she had been asked to leave, and she didn't leave. She ended up having her stuff confiscated. And several neighbors were concerned about her and her welfare for the reasons that Kevin is mentioning. She didn't speak English. I speak Spanish, so they wanted me to speak to her because they were not able to communicate with her. They were worried about what was going to happen to her now that her flowers were taken. And so I talked to her and I asked, where do you live? She lived in LA. She was dropped off here in the morning, and this had been happening. The neighbors had said this had been happening regularly, that she'd been dropped off, and so she couldn't leave. She had no physical way to take her flowers anywhere she said to go because she was waiting to get picked up. And so residents were concerned because, if it is the case that this person was trafficked, she was cited, and I asked her, her flowers were taken. How much were your flowers worth? She said her flowers, she had about 20 bouquets, $10 each, $200. And so neighbors were really concerned about what was going to happen to her when she ended up getting picked up when they were talking on the phone to me. And I ended up talking to our city manager about that event when it happened, and this is kind of when it also came up. Kevin asked about it at council. I would want evidence that most of these people are trafficked. Surely there are people that are trafficked. And so to me, the solution is not giving them a fine and necessarily confiscating. So I would want us to look at what are solutions for that situation, because as we've heard, many of these people don't have identification. We're not going to get that fine from them if they don't, probably, is my understanding. And really, the best hope, if we cannot, to try to help them, right? If they're really in that situation, what resources do we have to help them? And so that, if people who are complaining that they're not coming back. I think there is an issue, and I know Kevin mentioned some suggestions with the lemonade stands and the Girl Scouts, because, you know, to me, I'm not interested in passing an ordinance that's not going to apply to certain groups. That's discrimination. It should be applied fairly. And so if it's okay for little kids to have lemonade stands, then it should be okay for somebody to sell their fruits, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of regulations in terms of you can be within this many feet, you can be within this many feet. It's not very clear, you know, that saying, keep it simple, in terms of, you know, people being able to read it and understand it from all walks of life so that they're able to follow those rules. And so it's clear what they are. So it might seem a little bit like it's so regulated that you can't really be anywhere, you know, so then there's some big fines. And I think that there are people who are trying to make a living, and especially in these times, how do we regulate for the safety, for health, for welfare of our community? But, you know, if this was such a successful business model, I feel like we would see more people out there. And, you know, someone having a fruit stand, if people want to buy the fruit from them, fine. If not. So I think there's a lot of things that, as all of the discussion has come up, that should be clarified.
Can I get clarification? This does not apply to private property, is that correct?
The intent of this ordinance is for selling in the right-of-way, roadside vendors in right-of-way in the street, and then vendors in the right-of-way. That's the intent.
So if a young person or older person wanted to have a lemonade stand in their front yard, the provisions of this ordinance do not apply. If a person, again, wanted to sell eggs or fruit from their front yard, the provisions of this ordinance do not apply.
That is correct.
Okay. However, another section
yes,
could certainly apply. And when we talk about fruits and vegetables and eggs, there are certainly handling practices that apply for certification of eggs and so on and so forth. So just want to make that clear. Mm-hmm. And these ordinances aren't to be restrictive. Catherine said it a couple times. It's for health and safety.
Right.
And so these regulations on fruits and eggs and these sidewalk vendors, it's not punitive. It's so that if you buy that, you don't get sick when you eat it when you get home. So I just want to provide that for clarification, because like Andy said, if this doesn't apply, something else in the municipal code likely will. And again, it's for health and safety. So going back to this particular ordinance, for myself, as somebody that works under a lot of legislative mandates, my concern with this one is I see it as an unfunded mandate, which we get in education all the time, meaning we're going to put these rules on you, but we're not going to give you the tools or resources to appropriately have those rules in place. And looking at everything that's here, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. I think that's clear just from our discussion here and public comment. Tons of education and outreach that would need to be done on this topic. There's a ton of staff time that would need to be devoted to this, including resources, vehicles, and storage, and just all kinds of stuff. So I have a lot of concerns about that. I understand that we need to do cleanup on this as per the Senate bill, again, that we've been told we have to make sure we're in compliance with. But I have a problem having a set of rules or a guidebook or things for accountability when you have no mechanism in place to enact them. So that's all I have.
I need some clarification then. I point blank said if you stand in front of Stater Brothers, which is private property, could a girl sell Girl Scout cookies? By the way, I know she can. Why was I told she couldn't?
Again, based on the ordinance.
It's not under this ordinance, it's not covered. It would maybe
Correct.
covered in
That is
another
correct.
one. Right? Now, if somebody wants to sell bonsai trees, they can get a permit and they can sell on the sidewalk, correct? So the education would probably be to the legitimate sellers, which I think there's a few, no doubt, but they could actually get a permit and they could actually do all the things they're supposed to do and they could legally sell. I mean, we had that case years ago when the woman was selling the bedspreads. She had, I don't think we didn't have the thing where she had, it was right in front of where the post office is on Hamner. She sold the bedspreads. And she was totally legal. She had bedspreads hanging from the standards. So what instance would somebody, and again, I agree with you too, because eggs, that's one of the things that kind of bothered me at a recent farmer's market was they were selling eggs that were called unwashed. And it made me a little nervous because I wasn't sure what to do with them. I bought them, but I didn't know what to do with them. Well, you're supposed to, I guess they sand eggs, they do something to them, I'm not sure. So, under what conditions can a Girl Scout sell cookies in front of Stater Brothers? This one doesn't apply, so what would prohibit that?
Well, what I saw was within 25 feet of an entrance to or exit to a building, and I thought that might apply to the Stater Brothers situation. But if the entire intent of the ordinance is that it only will regulate persons in the public right-of-way.
Okay, all right, so I'm glad we clarified that.
So am I. And also, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I stated that I was not aware of a policy. That does not mean the policy doesn't exist.
In terms of Caltrans?
Yes.
Oh,
I hadn't heard of it. There may be one out there. I'm not saying I know that there is not.
It's actually it's an edict of the governor. He said, you know what, just hands off everything on Caltrans, because I tracked that down after with the homeless thing. And so they're trying to help people, they think. I mean, if somebody doesn't have ID, and I totally agree with you, Robin, in terms of outreach. I totally agree that for the person who wants to grow something in their backyard or whatever, I totally agree we need to do outreach. But how do you outreach somebody who doesn't even have ID? That right there tells you something. And it's not that I'm not unfeeling. I feel really bad for these people. I mean, I feel really bad that, you take their flowers and you don't know what's going to happen to them. And I don't know how you reach beyond that person who's utilizing that person and putting them in that position. I'm just not sure how to do it. So do we need to do, Colin, a addendum for the Girl Scout cookies or people doing a lemonade stand on private property?
I think it's a good idea for it to get a little bit of cleanup before we come back for a first read if the planning director is okay with that.
Okay.
I think there's some issues that we need to flesh out after hearing all the questions of council.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, great.
Thanks, Kevin. I understand the bottom line on this. The intent is just to get in compliance with the state law. And so this is a question on signage that, and we have talked about this in the past, like going into Eastvale, where they have like no panhandlers or no solicitors, that are posted. Does this ordinance allow us these changes to post that signage on our streets like they have in Eastvale?
You mean signage in the public right-of-way? Actual signage?
Yeah.
It doesn't address it, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really preventing the city from putting any type of real signage in the public right-of-way. It's just a question of what the message is. But yes, we can put similar to Eastvale, or we can put our own customized signage if we want to. It's the public right-of-way. We have that ability and access to do that.
All right. I mean, it was just a previous discussion that we've had about signage, and maybe that ties in, with these revisions. Let's see, I just made a note, during the parades, the carts that run up and down, we see it all the time. We don't do anything about it. It's is only for an hour or two, and everybody's got their own responsibilities during that time. What was mentioned about Girl Scout, selling Girl Scout cookies and lemonade stands and neighborhood kids and things like that, it's like, to me, there's a spirit of the law and there's a letter of the law. And I think that it's not going to come out right, but I think it's like, to me, just silly that we'd have to write in a code that would be that we're going to go after the Girl Scouts or kids selling lemonade. I mean, it's stupid in a sense. It's just like, why would we do that? Why do we have to address that in the code? I just don't, it's not registering with me. And I look at that as, like I said, spirit of law or letter of law. Colin, you made a comment about, in reference to Ted's, like hours of operation and like an hour after sunset. I know you don't see sunrise, but a lot of us in town do. So it's not only sunset, but, I don't want to hear this at 5:15 in the morning either, okay? So if you're going to play with that, I think you should put sunrise in there also.
Yeah, we could even start out with 10 a.m. All we have to do is make sure that the time restrictions are not unreasonable, unless it's in a non-residential zone, in which case the time restrictions have to match the local businesses.
So
okay.
But I guess where I'm trying to go with this whole thing, and it's what Robin brought up, that we're writing a whole bunch of rules again, and we're not going to enforce them. We're not. And so at what point that all these codes, they're reactive, they're not proactive. And I still haven't heard an answer on what are we going to do to make, what additional personnel do you need to, make this proactive, and what tools do you need? I mean, is there different type of programs, or do you need, or anything physical tools to move this forward? So I'll leave that as, what personnel, what tools do you need to make this proactive? The mayor mentions about, trafficking and things like that. So I had a question for the sheriff. I'm in agreement with that, Kevin.
There's a lot of proof.
What is our policy with the sheriff's department and working with code enforcement on some of these vendors that you've run across where we've gotten complaints, whether it's flower vendors? But like Kevin mentioned, here comes the driver, in the van, and where he doesn't have, ID or driver's license, what's our sheriff's policy on that?
Well, we do have a county human trafficking team, but they're primarily looking at sex crimes and that sort of stuff. So generally, they're not going to get involved in this sort of thing. A lot of times it takes the person to actually tell you that they're a trafficked person, then we can, get them some resources. But a lot of times, because of their immigration status, they're just not going to come forward with that information.
So we just move it down the road, let them leave, and...
Yeah, unless we know that they're a victim of a crime. I mean, we're not generally going further than that.
All right. And then, how are our deputies presently working with code enforcement? I mean, at what point, like, if there's a complaint, like, let's say for a while we had like the flower vendor that was out in the middle of Valley View near 2nd, and then we had the one at, I think, California and 8th for a while. How does the our sheriff's department here work in conjunction with code enforcement Who calls who helps who? What's the relationship?
Well, it goes both ways. So a lot of times they're coming in from citizen complaints, so those will go through dispatch, and we'll handle those just like a regular call for service, and we may not need to contact code enforcement.
Okay.
And a lot of times they may contact us. So it will go both ways, but we can issue those citations or confiscate the goods, just like code enforcement can. It's just a lot of times it comes down to a priority. So that's
right.
One of the lowest level priorities in a call for service, and with limited resources, we're handling, the more life and death sort of calls first, and so those can get pushed off, time-wise, and that's where, the citizens sometimes don't see or feel that there's a timely response. It's just a matter of, what other things are going on at the time. So it might take a little while to get out to them.
Yeah, and I think that, not beating the dead horse, but I know like at 8th in California, I mean, that was going on for, a few days. So it wasn't like, I'm not asking about the, the overall, time to show up within a few hours, but it was repetitive over a, series of time that way. So I'm just kind of wondering how we're going to work with this, especially if we're going to add more rules. How do we stay proactive with it?
Yeah, and I guess it's got to be really a case-by-case basis, depending on the availability of the deputies. I mean, sometimes it's slow and there's no calls for service, and we can handle those things, in a more timely manner or get to them. It's just, on the level of priority.
It's
when the deputies don't have anything to do, and they're not writing reports. Generally, they're out, conducting traffic enforcement or, looking for other type of criminal activity. So, the vending is just kind of at the bottom, kind of level of what we're looking to enforce. So a lot of it is complaint driven. You get, complaints about the vendors, and that's usually what prompts us to go out.
Okay.
Generally, we're not proactively looking to go out and find vendors that are in violation of the ordinance. It's generally complaint driven.
All right. And like I remember that one though on Valley View, I thought that was somewhat of an unsafe situation, being, it was past dark and still out in the street, physically in the street. It's kind of those situations how we would react to that as far as.
In some of those, I'm not familiar with the one that you're speaking of, but I mean, there's other codes that would also apply. It doesn't have to be just the city ordinance. You could have a vehicle code with a pedestrian in the roadway or obstructing traffic, that sort of thing. So there's other enforcement avenues, not just the city ordinance for the vending.
So we could look at it overall as just a life safety issue also.
Correct.
Okay. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Thanks.
Catherine?
Just one more thing. So SB 946, my understanding, if you could affirm or confirm, so we right now only have an ordinance that pertains to solicitors.
That is correct. However, it does address a little more than solicitors, if you read it a little.
Yes. Okay. So basically, what SB 946 states is that whatever code we have has to be in compliance with the state law. It doesn't require us to add a bunch of new rules. Just that the rules that we have must be in compliance. There's limits to how you can set your rules, because what happened before is cities would just outlaw sidewalk vendors and say you can't have them in our city, and that's where, as part of the SB 946, saying that this provides economic development opportunities, it provides opportunities for entrepreneurship. So, basically saying you can't just outlaw them. So we're going to just give you some parameters that you can use. So there's nothing that states we have to regulate them to a certain extent, just that this is the maximum to which we can regulate them.
Yes, basically, you're correct. It's setting the parameters, but each city is allowed to adopt an ordinance specific to their community to be able to protect the health, welfare, and safety of their community.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Ted?
Yeah, I have one other thing, and it seems like we're going to send us back for clarification on some issues. And with that, as like one of the callers talked about selling their produce their extra vegetables or their eggs, they can do it. And if we're going to do this, the California Farm Bureau was very emphatic about making sure that family farms could do that on their residence, in front of their properties. So I know that they added some business profession code that allowed them to do that. So for our family farms, just like Patrick Mitchell and the EAT program, they can do that. So we want to protect, again, those people that have that. So this doesn't do, but I don't want to be under the, getting discouraged. It's like sidewalk vendors, but that would allow there are already provisions that allow them to do that in the state law. For people that have their extra eggs or their produce right there, have their family at their location, they can actually vend.
Yes, and that's
and this all started out with the guests orchard there in Riverside.
Yes.
They were trying to shut them down and said, nope, can't do that. So you might want to look at that so we answer some of the questions about what people do. Thank you.
Anyone else? I agree with you, by the way, Greg. I mean, I don't think any deputy is going to walk up to a lemonade. I think I've heard it happen. They're going to walk up to a lemonade stand and say, "Kid, I'm taking your lemons." But I was aware of the whole guest lawsuit that occurred. So, but I do think it needs to go back. I'm not sure. Does somebody want to make a motion with changes or send it back, and what instructions to send it back for? Or do I have a motion to approve?
Mayor?
Yeah.
I would support letting this go back to planning staff, but maybe a short shopping list on, let's give some direction.
Yeah.
Generally, if you agree with that.
What do you have in mind?
I'm not going to pick on the Girl Scouts or somebody selling lemonade. I know that much. I think hours were a concern, as far as, we talked about being the trail or being in the street, and then hours of operation, sunrise, sunset.
Well, except that you make the delineation between commercial and residential. Commercial, you maybe let them be there between 10 and 8 o'clock, but residential, can you make it 10?
Well, I think this is something that staff should work out.
Okay.
I mean, otherwise, we're going to get a pile of stuff where...
But there is a delineation they'd have to make, right? Between commercial and residential, maybe.
Possible.
Yeah.
It's just I don't want it to become where, let's see, you're a commercial, so you don't know you're 15 minutes over. But it's near a residential street, so actually you got another 30 minutes to be here. Let's not compound the problem. It's just simple stuff, clean. I would just think, but I'd also like to see a plan, like I said earlier, on how overall is this going to be proactive, and what personnel, what tools are you going to need to accomplish that? Guys, feel free to jump in with
anything.
I'll ask the city manager, is it sufficient just to send it back based on the discussion that we've had, Andy? Okay. Then I would second Greg's motion.
Ted, Robin? Nothing, Robin? Ted?
No, I'll agree with Greg. Hours of operations, location, just what we talked about here, and clarification. We go back to the KISS principle because it's really important that Kathy and Lieutenant's people, you have to keep this thing easy to read, easy to understand, because judges like it simple. Thank you. So I agree with that.
So if there's no further discussion, questions, comments, can we have a roll call vote? We have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Alleman?
Yes.
Councilmember Grummeyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoffman? Mayor Pro Tem Newton?
Yes.
Mayor Bash?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Thank you.
Moving on to 7, City Council, City Manager, Staff Communications. Chief? Anything? Nothing to report? Matt? Nothing to report. Lisette? Alma? Dana?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good.
I just want to let everybody know that the annual recruitment for boards and commission has opened up on Monday. It is an all electronic application process. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to call the city clerk's office. I'll be happy to help you with the new process. We are online, and emails have gone out to our incumbents to let them know that they do have to apply for their seat again. And just if you hear anything in the community from your constituents, just please refer them to me and I'll be happy to walk them through the process. Thank you all.
Thanks. Chad? Brian?
And just to let Councilman Newton know, Cubs 6, Dodgers 5, 11 innings. That's a sweep.
The Cubs have swept the Dodgers? Oh, man. Chief, anything? Attorney?
No, sir.
Okay. Andy? Ted?
I think you're going to do this, but for those who know, Eugene Pritchard passed away recently, and 102 years old. He was the Navy veteran that got honored by all the city staffers and a lot of people in the community on his 102nd birthday. He lived off of Park Ridge. So 102-year-old Navy veteran, World War II. Good life for Eugene. Rest in peace.
Robin? Catherine?
Would you just, do you know what's the deadline for the applications for, if anyone's watching, the deadline?
It is June 3rd. That is the last day to apply. Thank you.
Craig?
3 things. I'll start off with, since Brian brought that up, Ted had it on his reports. Both of us were at the T-ball opening ceremony.
I missed it.
Yeah, you did. And I got to say play ball and all of that.
Good.
But we had a contest beforehand, and so I asked everybody who were Angel fans, some applause, who were Dodgers fans, some applause, and I said, and I have a special prize for all the Cubs fans out here. And one guy felt sorry for me and clapped. There was none. So, doesn't faze me at all. 2 other things. I guess Sam left already, so we had to meet Sam and Brandon and myself. We had a meeting today out at the Disney Ranch with, I think, 4 principal engineers from Disney on some on-site projects they want to do in coordination with our storm drain project that we're going to run down Valley View and 4th Street. So I don't do it very often, but I wanted to kudos the way Sam handled everything with Disney. They were very impressed, and he was gave them all the information that they needed. So something that we'll be working on in the next few months. And then one other question, Andy, and I'd like to have a report to council. Here recently we did a rebid on the pre-engineered metal building for the out at the water tanks, and then I looked at we did the rebid on this HVAC system. My concern is that, and we don't do it very often, but I don't want to be myself dropping dollars to pick up quarters. So I would like to know exactly what it costs us to rebid a project from, let's say, if we re-advertise on like Planet Bid, whatever printing costs we have, if we have any additional engineer time, what does a rebid on a project, cost us to put that out? And that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
For me, I kind of like to review our sound ordinance to kind of see what we're doing with that, how we're enforcing it. I'd like to maybe get a report and have a discussion on that. Exactly what we're doing. Is that possible, Andy, in the next couple of months? Yeah, I just want to know how we're enforcing it, if we're getting, what the kind of complaints are, what just kind of a status update, and maybe talk about it a little bit. I'm not looking to revise it, I just want to know where it is on the pecking order and that kind of thing. Yeah, sure. And then we can ask you questions. Yeah, that sounds great. And seeing nothing else, so yeah, Eugene Pritchard passed away, World War II veteran, Navy. He was a well-known pool hustler at the senior center, well into his late 90s. Greg, remember, we all chipped in when his bicycle was stolen. We bought him a new bike. He was 99 years old. And he was riding that bike until early last year, and then they finally made him stop that. But 102 years old, he's nowadays you're not supposed to call them the greatest generation, but they beat back some pretty bad boys between 1941 and 1945. And so we're going to close the meeting in honor of Eugene Pritchard. We're adjourned.